Forks, the proud home of the University of North Dakota. This is the time and place for the Jobs Development Authority meeting. We'll begin with roll call, please.
Michael?
Here.
Wasowski? Here. Weber?
Here.
Linsky? Here. Conley?
Here.
Sandy? Lee?
Here. Here. School. I'll begin with item 2.1. Mr. Hatch, the Northern Tier Seed Flex-Based Loan Request, please. Good evening. Mr. Lund.
Mr. Weber, we skipped over 1.2, I believe.
Election of vice chair, secretary.
Okay. Item 1.2, election of vice chairperson and secretary treasurer.
What's that job?
I'd be looking for.
Who is the current vice chair?
Mr. Bean is vice chair and Mr. Kalami is secretary treasurer.
Thank you. And this is an annual election?
Correct.
Every year. Why do we do this one every year? I bet I voted for it, and I don't even know, but if you could.
As you may recall, I think it was late 2020, the procedure was changed so that as vice president of city council, you were automatically then chair of the JDA. When that changed, then the election just was for vice president and secretary treasurer. And this has been the process annually in July since that time.
I don't think I did vote for this, but it passed nonetheless. Very good. So we'd just be looking for a nomination for vice chairperson of the Jobs Development Authority.
I nominate.
Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry, we didn't hear you. Could you repeat that?
I nominate Ken Veen.
Very good. We have a motion, a nomination.
I second.
And a second for Mrs. Howski. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Congratulations, Mr. Vino. Now we're looking for a nomination for secretary treasurer. Yes, we have a motion for Mr. Kavami, from Mr. Vian, and a second from Ms. Lunsky. Any questions, comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Congratulations, Mr. Kavami. Moving on then, item 2.1, Mr. Lund, Northern Tier Seed Flex-Based Loan Request. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Chairman Mermer, Member Chinsky, Members of the Authority. The project before you this evening is the Northern Tier Seed Company. They are seeking a $34,549 PACE loan to support the proposed expansion of their facility. As background, Northern Tier Seed is a Thompson-based agricultural company focused on conditioning and storage of seeds for customers across the United States. Over the years, they've had a number of expansions, and for any of you who routinely drive on Highway 15 would attest the company that I first met in 2006 is barely recognizable today. The Growth Fund has played a significant role in their expansions. They've provided them up to approximately $300,000 in PACE loans that have leveraged $900,000 worth of grants from the Bank of North Dakota and nearly $9 million that leveraged nearly $9 million worth of capital investment. Company. Mr. Weber from the company is here today. I'm going to do the presentation, but if you were up here, thank you very much for your sustained support of the company. Northern Tier Seed conditions roughly 1 million bushels of soybeans and wheat for 6 nationally known companies. Their current projects involves expanding business with one of their wheat customers. They will be increasing their square footage to help relocate 4 of their current hopper bins, so they will have to place and purchase and install 2 60,000 bushel hoppers. In comparison, the hoppers they use today for wheat are 6,000, so this is a function of 10x from that in terms of that expansion. Additionally, they will plan to upgrade their color sorter equipment and add a load cell to further improve product efficiency and cleanliness. In terms of the project details, it's a total investment of just over $783,000. The company is seeking the PACE loan, as I suggested, to help reduce the interest rate on their commercial loan for First Aid Bank from an estimated 6.5% to 3.25% on a $750,000 note. That PACE loan of $34,549 will leverage a grant from the Bank of North Dakota for the same purpose of just a little over $103,000. This loan will be secured by personal guarantees from the principals, Mr. Weber and Mr. Paul Spruill. as well as the support of real estate mortgage on the property and UCC filings on the that we purchased. From a real estate standpoint, the loan will have a loan to value of 41.9%, which is very, very, really good. The Growth Fund Committee considered this project on June 26th and unanimously recommended approval. And as I mentioned, Mr. Weber is here today, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer any questions as well.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Lund. Any questions for Mr. Lund or Mr. Weber? Ms. Lonsky?
So can you explain why we reach out the flex space to Thompson and when it's not a Grand Forks company?
Sure. The Growth Fund has in their, I don't know if it's a charter or certainly their policies and procedures, have identified Grand Forks County as an area in which you would invest. I guess philosophically, the dollars that came to capitalize the Growth Fund over the years, the Growth Fund established in 1987, and the source of those dollars was sales tax. The sales tax comes from the region. So speaking on behalf of the leaders, I think that were in place at that time.
Along that same line, my involvement with economic development, I've always suggested that we can't be an island of wealth amidst poverty in need of economic development, and that this sort of development has been very beneficial for the city and for the region. So certainly primary sector, this is directly relevant to our priorities. And we're fortunate that Mr. Weber continues to invest in this area and that he's keeping his headquarters here. I remember previous council president Al Gershman would say of this kind of deal, bring me more deals like this. Fantastic local, regional business. Looking for guests.
Just a quick question. Mr. Weber is no relation to our chair, Mr. Weber.
I'm sure that all Webers are related in some way, but not any direct way that I'm aware.
All right, I'll move approval.
Got a motion from Mayor Potensky, second from Mrs. Sowski.
Yeah.
Sorry, thanks. Let me open the public hearing on 2.1. Does anyone wish to speak to this matter? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. We have a motion to approve. Mayor Potensky, second from Mrs. Sowski. Further comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you, Mr. Weber.
Thank you.
Item 2.2, Memorial Village Investments Loan Request, Mr. Phelan.
Chairperson Weber.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'd like to ask myself to recuse myself from voting on this item or discussing this item. We are not, directly involved with Memorial Village Development 2. However, our ongoing work with UND and UND Athletics on a professional level, I think creates a conflict of interest, and I'd like to just recuse myself from speaking or voting on this item.
Chair Weber, I
Yes,
would motion to allow Kyle to continue to vote or to continue with the intention of voting it down. So I would motion to allow Mr. Kvamme to continue to vote.
Very good. We have a motion to allow Mr. Kvamme to vote on this matter. This is according to guidance from our city attorney.
So do we have a second?
We would still need a second for the motion. If I may, Mr. Gaustad, correct me if I'm wrong. The suggestion is that we all have a good faith in one another, that we are going to act in the best interest of the city. Accordingly, it's appropriate for Mr. Kvamme to announce his potential conflict, but our motion is a good faith motion to say, no, we would allow you to speak on this matter.
Yeah, you start with the premise that you're required to vote on matters. And even with a conflict, you disclose the conflict, and the non-conflicted members of the governing body can then vote to allow the member to participate in the vote. If this motion doesn't pass, then he's not allowed to participate in the vote.
If this motion does not pass.
Correct.
Right. And I said that we have good faith, but he's also explained a direct conflict, and we may consider that as well.
Correct.
So we're still looking for a second.
I'll second.
We have a second from Mr. Weigel.
Mr. Weber,
Please,
if I may,
Mr. Sandy.
just for Mr. Kavami's benefit, because I don't want any issues for Mr. Kvamme in the future. Mr. Kavami, are you a partner at Icon? So
Yes.
do you share in profits of Icon?
Yes, sir.
And with that in mind, knowing that I do not believe, I 100% believe that you would vote with your conscience more than voting with your pocket. But I believe you are conflicted in this situation. And I believe that if you vote, and I'm totally okay with you voting because I believe that you're going to vote, which would actually make sense, and I'm okay with that. But at some point in the future, somebody's going to point the finger and say that this wasn't right. I don't believe that you should vote on this. And so I'm going to be voting no. If everyone else votes yes, fine, I have no problem. Don't have a problem with it.
Thank you, President Sim. Yes. And with that, any further comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
So the motion is defeated. Mr. Kavami will not be voting on this matter. Thanks. Mr. Phelan.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. This matter was before the Growth Fund Committee and it was passed unanimously. And I just want to go through what we're requesting of you this evening. Later in the City Council agenda, there's a pilot exemption of 95% at 20 years. And in this specific Growth Fund loan plays into that exemption. I think when we estimated, the repayment of this loan is, if it's a 95% pilot exemption, I think we figured out between 20 to 25% of that 95% exemption relates to that tax increment and paying back this particular loan. I'm also with, I look in the back of the room, Steve Beering is here on behalf of the developer. Mike Pieper, the Associate VP of Facilities, is here on behalf of the University of North Dakota and President Armacost. And Peter Johnson, I see in the back, is here on behalf of the UND Alumni Association. So if you have any questions at the end of the presentation from Dan and I, they'll be here to answer any questions you may have in front of the public hearing itself. In front of you, as you approved on June 5th, when we looked at the preliminary pilot exemption of 95% at 20 years, we also preliminarily said that we would move forward with a overall 3% loan from the Growth Fund, and we would go to the Growth Fund Committee and the JDA, and that's why we're all here on July 5th to go over these projects. So what was approved is a 2% for the first 10 years on this loan, and then a 4% the final 10 years for an overall 3%. As we've gone through this project, and Michaela Hewitt was here, and we've had lots of briefings on this particular project. At first, with the softball complex, when you think about that softball complex, we have a donor that's willing to contribute up to $2.5 million of a budgeted $4.5 million NCAA regulation softball complex. So it'll really move the campus and softball and athletics to the next level. Along the way, when I've spoken with the Park District and the school district, they've approved the pilot, and I'll talk about that later because it's going to allow them, they and their teams, to plan this field sooner rather than later and get a real facility that's really more of a world-class facility than what they get to play on currently right now. We tried to look at first a revenue bond on this particular project, similar to the Beacon by Epic. And it just wasn't a viable project. This project is very tight. Dan's going to come up here and talk about a bunch of guarantees. And why we want guarantees is because we've gone over and over on this particular project. If this project developer could have done 100% pilot over 20 years, they would have taken that. We have something less, so it's a pretty tight project. Revenue bond, when we did speak with our financial advisors, would have an interest rate of 6 to 7%. And it's something that our financial advisors and our Marine and our finance department did not want to move forward with. So that was out of picture. We brought up perhaps somebody else like UND or the UND Alumni Association could either provide a grant or a loan or do something to close the gap. We received word back from President Armacost and his team that was not a viable option, both from the Alumni Association and UND, because they have lots of other challenging contributions that they need to finish the Pollard 2 to move forward with the STEM Center. Merrifield, Twomley, I think the list went on and on about what they're going to have to contribute despite getting state funds. There's a local match. So they're really going to be embedded in that, even though this is $2 million. They really didn't have, we're going to have enough challenges with other large projects to contribute to projects. So that's why they asked the city to try to move forward with an economic development loan from President Karmakas. As you recall, they asked for a 2% loan. We kept that at 3% overall over the 20 years. And instead, what the city council did is that you gave on the pilot. So you moved the pilot up from a 90% pilot to a 95%. So that's where the city council gave on this, but we kept the interest rate where it was at. So there's been a lot of discussion on this particular loan and what we need to do to try to move the project forward as we move forward with the revenue bond. We also talked about a loan. Why don't you just go out and get a commercial loan? And a commercial loan, from what we've been told, is going to likely run between 6.5% to 7%, so similar to what a revenue bond would cost. So again, the project's so tight that wasn't going to be a viable option either. So the other thing we do understand is that time is of the essence. The developer wants to get moving with the project. The person who's going to donate up to $2.5 million wants to move forward with the project because he wants to see the softball complex get completed in time for his daughter to finish, and she's already a sophomore in college. And as we know, a lot of these projects are going to take a couple of years to finish. So that's why we're here in July. The goal was to try to get this in front of you in July to try to find a way forward. So we think we found a way forward, and just so you know our mindset when we bring projects to you, we're trying to get the project across the finish line. And so really the city as the last effort to move the project forward, that's why this growth fund loan is in front of you. And we also try to be very, very careful to set up precedent. So why is this unique and different? It is a partner project with the University of North Dakota that we partner on a lot of projects. Number two, it will have a public entity in the softball complex that not only the University of North Dakota will be able to use, but also our local local teams and park district will be able to use. So there is a community benefit that we are going to receive. Further, UND is willing to work on a usage agreement that the community is already using the Pollard Center right now and that turf in a variety of different ways. UND intends to improve the track adjacent to Memorial Village 1. And again, that's another asset UND has said that they would allow the community to use. So there's lots of community uses as part of this. So not only we're giving an under market a loan, the city is earning about 4% on our money. And so if we give out a 3% loan, we are losing on this. But I think what we're trying to do is distinguish this project is there are a lot of community benefits that we're going to see, not only with the softball complex, but we're going to try to lever these other facilities that are nearby on behalf of the community. With that, I'm going to ask Mr. Costa to come up here and kind of go through those various guarantees and documents that we've attached to the loan.
Great. There's a lot of documents that were attached to today's agenda. This is similar to what the JDA did or St. John's Block 5. You're normally not a participant in a pilot agreement, but because the lending transaction is connected to the pilot, the JDA becomes a party to the pilot agreement. That's why that was attached. The loan, again, is for $2 million. The conditions of the loan, you won't be making the loan until all the conditions have been satisfied. And I'll just go through them real quick. One of which is that it's finally completed. The Memorial Village project is completed. There is some discussion, and we'll talk about that in a bit, about distributions being made during the course of the construction. I would not recommend that because that requires oversight by the JDA. As you know, if they're wanting 25% of the loan proceeds, then we have to assure ourselves that 25% of the project has been completed. And there's additional oversight that I don't think the JDA is prepared to take on, and some risks, lending risk in doing that. Also, that we receive a commitment with respect to our lien priority that is satisfactory, a title commitment, that all the loan documents are delivered, and we'll talk about that in a bit, that the property is replatted and rezoned, that North 25th Street is vacated and UND enters into an agreement with the city to maintain that vacated area. As Mr. Phelan talked about, a use agreement there is discussions about a use agreement for this new softball field, Pollard and track among the school district and park district. Also that there's no default at the time of the loan closing, and that you'll see in the pilot agreement there's a number of representations and warranties that are being asked of from the developer, and at the time of the closing those representations and warranties are determined to be accurate at the time of the closing. All those have to be satisfied before we move forward with the loan. Most important is that the property is developed and complete. The loan, as noted, is for $2 million. It's a 20-year note. First 10 years are at a 2% interest rate. The annual payment is a little over $117,000. The second 10 years is at a 4% interest rate, and the payment there is a little over $142,000. The security that we're seeking with respect to the repayment, the loan as drafted would be to the developer. They'd be the primary debtor. And then what we do is we set up a situation to secure that, not just with the signature on the promissory note. You got to bear in mind that the land that the building will be located on and where the softball field will be located on is, I understand, will be owned by the UND Alumni Association. And the way I understand it is the lot that the building will be constructed, there'll be a long-term lease between the developer and the Alumni Association in order to construct that building on that land. And therefore, we're going to take what's called the leasehold mortgage and security agreement, which means we'll take a security interest in the building that will be owned by the developer, and also the leasehold interest that their developer and the Alumni Association will be entered into, and some personal property. The reason you do that is, again, from the standpoint of if we have to get into a collection situation, we can foreclose and we can acquire the building, the leasehold interest, and basically step in the shoes then. And you don't own it and try to resell those and recapture those the money from that resale. Okay, that's the first item of security that you'll be approving tonight. Second is a guarantee from the developer owners or owners of the developer. The way it's established right now, the way the documents are drafted is that if you're a 10% owner, you'd sign a guarantee. We want to make sure that we have at least 80% coverage. So the example I gave is if you had 20 owners, each one of them having less than 10%, nobody theoretically would have to sign a guarantee under the 10% rule. But we've established it in the terms of the agreement that we have to have at least 80% ownership. Even though they may own less than 10%, we have to have 80% owners signing these personal guarantees. Also, as part of the package is that the Alumni Association would execute a guarantee as well, guaranteeing the repayment of this promissory note. That would then be secured by a mortgage on the land that they would own, both for the building and the softball field. I've had discussions with them last week with the developer, with attorneys for the developer, the Alumni Association, and the university regarding the loan. I can tell you that there is resistance from the developer to sign the guarantee, or the developer owners to sign the guarantee. There is also concern by the Alumni Association with respect to their guarantee and the mortgage. One of the issues that they expressed to me was it could lead to what's called a private inurement. It's a very complicated tax rule that a charitable organization can't be engaged in acts that would benefit private individuals. And there is a concern that was raised by the Alumni Association attorney that it may affect their status, that it may have some private inurement issues. What I've expressed to them is that if they wanted to present an alternative financing proposal, we'd certainly listen to it. But I've also expressed to them that would have to have equivalency as far as security as far as repayment, and security as far as collateral. And if any type of change would come forward, we bring it back to the JDA for its review and consideration. So that is a brief outline of the documents that have been presented and being requested for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Yosted. Before we forget again, let me open the public hearing on this matter. Does anyone wish to speak to item 2.2? We'll close the public hearing. JDA members, questions, comments on what we've heard so far? Mrs. Sussman, please.
Okay. So who's the guy who is donating the $2.5 million?
I just knew him as a gentleman that his daughter is on the softball team.
Right.
I've spoken to him a couple times. He has committed up to $2.5 million. And I think there's an initial installment that he's willing to contribute here, I think in July. But I don't know if Peter or Mike Peeper or is able to speak, but that's who the gentleman is.
So you don't have his name?
I can't figure
Where'd he get $2.5 million?
My understanding is he is involved in this pharmaceutical industry.
So the usage agreement between, I guess, the school and park board and the university hasn't been worked out, right? But those are going to be the three parties that are involved in that.
You are correct.
Do you not think that maybe the school board and the park board should chip in a little bit then, if maybe they're the ones that are going to be utilizing this facility along with the university?
Councilmember Rosado, I think they'll be part of that. I know part of the discussion is, what the fees will be to use the fields and all those sorts of things. We'll work that out as part of the usage agreement and obviously include them because they know how they're going to use it and when and all those sorts of things. I suspect UND is going to have primary interest, but we just want to fill in those second and third layers of interest.
So just a week and a half ago, the mayor, you, and myself were down in DC for a national security summit. Has anybody done any type of research to see if this is being funded by a foreign entity?
As you know, the state legislature passed a statute this past session. I can't remember the exact number. The Senate bill regarding foreign ownership, entering into development agreements with respect to entities that might have certain ownership in certain foreign countries, one of which is China and Russia and Iran and a few others, I think. That's embedded within the pilot agreement. So they have to comply with, that's one of the representations that is being made by the developer.
Is that they will comply with national security?
No, they'll comply with the state statute. And I think there's also a provision in there that talks about if they're not engaged in some activity that is adverse to the national security of the United States, state of North Dakota, the city of Grand Forks. We've embedded that within the development agreement as well.
So we don't really know where the money's coming from, and we don't really know if there's a national security risk. I mean, it sounds like there might be some questions that need a little answering, but.
I think the answer, Councilmember Osalski, is that the gentleman's real. They've had private conversations with the UND Alumni Association. And if there's anything that's untoward, there's laws that, and as part of the development agreement, that we follow.
All right, thank you, Mr. Keelan.
Dave Albert. Sorry, he joined. Dave Albert is his name. And he was here at one of the city council meetings. I would say about a month or two ago. He was actually in town. He's from, he lives in the Chicagoland area.
Dave Albert?
Albert.
Mr. Vian.
Mr. Phelan, this development really consists of two things, the commercial and the housing, and then the soccer. The sale or whatever, the ownership of land will be by the Alumni Association. But is the developer going to own the softball fields too? Or how does that get split once? And I'm trying to figure out who is this loan actually going to and what is it paying? Because I like the idea of $2.5 million for the a donation toward a $4 million softball complex. To me, that's very enticing to be able to do. But I'm trying to figure out how then the money that is being requested of us fits into the total equation.
There's during the replanting, there's going to be 2 lots. One lot will be where the Memorial Village 2 building will be located. The other lot will be dedicated to the softball field. And the Alumni Association is going to own the dirt, the land, in both of those lots. They'll enter into a long-term lease, as I understand it, a long-term lease with the developer in order for the developer to put a building on their property. It's similar to other transactions that have occurred at the university. As I also understand, is that the lot where the softball field will be located will be owned by the Alumni Association during the construction period and probably for a bit after the construction period. And as I understand, there's going to be an effort then to transfer that lot to the University of North Dakota ownership. There has to be some approval through the state legislature to accomplish that task. The development agreement does contemplate the possibility of the softball field being transferred to the University of North Dakota. If that happens, then that parcel obviously becomes exempt from property taxation. We've talked about that in the district inspection pilot. But our lending transaction stays in place. And so our lien interest will continue to attach to the real estate. The loans, the way it's set up, will be to the developer. The developer would then use that money and presumably get the money. The Alumni Association would then use the $2.5 million it's getting from the gift from that donor, and we use to pay the contractors to build the softball field.
So the developer is building, in short, the softball fields. Is that right? As a part of the total, and then the ownership will be transferred to the university or to the alumni.
I don't know if it's been accomplished yet with respect to the land being transferred to the Alumni Association, but it will be by the time the construction starts. The Alumni Association will own the dirt for the construction.
But who's going to own the actual real estate that's on the land?
For the period of time, as I understand it, and Mrs. Beaver is probably the best person to answer those questions.
Yeah, as stated earlier, the foundation would enter into an agreement with the developers to build it. The foundation would own the softball field. The university would have a kind of full cost recovery management operation piece of it until we could take ownership through a future gift that would have to be worked through the legislature. So it'll be owned initially by the foundation, but we will have an operating kind of lease agreement with them to schedule.
So the operation and maintenance of whether it's the street or the facility will be by
the university. We have multiple arrangements with the foundation, with some medical clinics in other cities, and different developments that we work with the foundation. We typically have a full cost recovery, so the foundation doesn't have to pay any operating costs.
So in other words, this isn't unusual what you're doing here, or?
No, I would say the ground lease is to the foundation for the development of mixed uses advisement by the state's bond council. This will be the second, with MB1 being the first and MB2. The softball field arrangement between us and foundation is pretty typical to the ones we've worked with the School of Medicine, working with them currently on the Old Bank Forward building and some things like that.
And if I could, while you're up, the issue that I brought up since the very beginning is, of course, you're taking parking lot, part of it's used, part of it's probably not, and replacing that with usages that won't be parking, I guess, for the public. How are you accommodating this on your master plan for parking and accessibility? I go out to the High Performance Center now and you park in those lots, and that's going to now be developed. Or you have the fraternities and sororities not park. How is that parking going to be accommodated now?
Sure. So we'll end up actually creating more parking south of Second Street, kind of along the south edge of the Pollard and the south edge of the stadium. That'll kind of wrap into the MB1 development. We're also creating better pedestrian linkage to the ERC lot and extending the Pollard lot a little further to the east. So we're picking up a lot of underutilized parking that we will work with, student athletes and staff, because we will be moving staff further to the east to work in the Pollard building. Yeah. And they can occupy those spaces. Also, with what we've done over the last few years, we've started to move a lot more people back to the campus core. We're starting to see our parking drop off in the Columbia lot a bit, so that'll open up some additional parking for employees and students. We have an expansion of parking around the Burtness, the Gamble. Gamble's currently being used as swing space for Merrifield. So if you look at our portfolio and where people are activating the campus, we feel very comfortable that we can accommodate, a daily work schedule and even on events. The parking lot is also averages, off the top of my head, around 300, 350 vacant spaces. So we'll use the parking lot a little more heavily.
What's the anticipated time for the expansion of Pollard?
Our hope is that it'll be started by the end of the summer, probably like a 1st August start.
So these would be potentially.
ERC also has a $30 million project, so we'll be working down there with some of those parking improvements. But the Pollard Center will be probably slightly ahead of the MB2. Track. The Memorial Field, so MB1 and the new Pollard addition in between is the track and field. Both of them are well beyond their life cycle. We saw a lot of youth sports and high school sports want to access the university's facilities. We prep our exterior fields by removing the snow prior to the spring, so it melts and you can get on a lot early. Turf melts a lot quicker, so we had a lot of youth soccer and things happening on our old football field. But both of them need an overlay really to be functional, and so that's the last step in the Pollard project. MB1 will be done, the Pollard addition will be done, all the rough construction, and we'll finish it off with overlaying the track and the turf. One other thing to mention on the softball is that it is a full turf facility, infield and outfield, and it's flat. So again, we'll remove the snow in the spring. It'll melt quickly. I foresee people wanting to access that field for soccer, even taking infield for baseball and those types of things, because it will be flat turf free.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. A quick comment. We have two separate but related issues before us this evening. There's the loan for approval from the JDA. There's a pilot for approval from the City Council that we'll be looking at later. These, again, separate but related issues. There's also going to be infrastructure costs involved. Infrastructure costs are a legitimate role for the city. Pilot is a legitimate economic development strategy. This loan, while not entirely unprecedented, this would be our second. The first was for something in the heart of downtown. We've already, as a city, invested heavily in the University Avenue corridor, etc. This is a complicated deal, and I just wanted for us to keep in mind that we have another issue coming forward and that these are connected. With that, Ms. Linsky.
Todd, I was hoping you could explain. So pilot is payment in lieu of taxes, but UND doesn't pay property tax. So can you explain how that fits together?
I can, Councilmember Linsky, and Mr. Gossick can finish any of the cracks I leave behind. This land right now is true. It's UND's land, UND proper, so it's we're getting zero, but it's going to get transferred to the UND Alumni Association. And right now, this reserve for assessment, the value that we have when we look at that financial assessment that we do, that Marine does, we're estimating the land will be valued at about 1.3 million. And so that's going to come on the taxable rolls. So that's a big win. So when we get to the pilot, that's a win because in the land, it cannot be exempted. So we're going to go from zero to, we're going to have a land value of $1.3 million for those facilities, plus we'll have a 5% increment on the pilot of the real estate value that we're going to add to it with that mixed use building. And for maybe a little time, even for the softball complex until hopefully UND wants it, the legislature to allow it to transfer back to UND itself, and therefore will pay taxes. But it's a win from a taxable value perspective. So if you're the school district, if you're the county or the park district, this is a winner. Schools and the parks get to use these facilities. They get more revenue than they ever had before. The county just keeps winning because the city is one who's developing basically, generally in the county. And so they win. We have some of the hardest things, right? The pilot is not real significant to us. Then we're going to move forward with this loan to try to make it happen. And then we're going to come through with some infrastructure investments that we need to make too to turn this parking lot into a mixed-use development because it's functioned as a parking lot since time immemorial. And so now we're going to have to come back and invest some areas, primarily in the sewer, so we can have a sewer that can serve these facilities. There'll be a storm pond that UND will pay the vast majority of that. We'll have the streets from 2nd Avenue to finishing up University Avenue. Those will have to get redone. Both of those are reconstruction, so those are 80% funded by the city. So the city really is the indispensable partner to get these projects done. And we follow these projects with our partner in UND and the developer to the very end of these projects. And when this gets done, that east side of campus is going to be extraordinary. As much as we brag about that other side of campus, I mean, there was a lot of conversations, a lot of hand-wringing back in the day about whether we should participate and help fund some of that stuff, and the city did do that. Now everyone's a champion of it. I suspect on the east side of campus, when this all gets done, we'll have a similar chorus of cheers about all the great things that we did. And in this case, I think we'll have a public amenity in a softball complex that we'll be able to use along with the pollard and this track. I think it, and then it kind of plays into our own quality of life investments that we're talking about too, with courts and turf, aquatics, about, those facilities and what size they need to be and how do we use those, particularly the turf, now that we have all these other assets too. So it's going to renew and rejuvenate a lot of the facilities in our community at the same time.
Okay, so you said UND is tax exempt, but the foundation is not?
It's not.
But UND could take that back?
Not on the mixed use. They will not be, this mixed use building that will have commercial and I think it's 5-story buildings, 1 or 2 levels of commercial, the rest market rate apartments. It's part of this agreement. They will not be able to turn that back to UND. UND can do it legally due to their bond covenants anyway with housing. So that will always stay as a mixed use development. Most of the value on the pilot is, the vast majority is in that mixed use development. The softball complex is, they're going to look to turn that back to UND itself, but there's not a lot of value in that softball complex versus that mixed use development.
Thank you.
What is the purpose of returning it to UND then? Is this just a workaround to avoid the state's prohibition on financing athletic facilities?
I would say, it could be called that, or I would say this is, I think what you would say to the 2020 legislature, the state does not fund athletic facilities. This is a way that UND and the Alumni Association with a developer, what is this, a P3 or 4 or 5, whatever it is, to include Grand Forks to work to improve a facility, and not only a facility for UND, but also a facility for the community. And then they have to go back to say, can we return this to UND? I suspect the Alumni Association doesn't have a lot of interest in owning the softball complex, and they really want to turn it back over to UND itself to own and operate.
It's a very, very complicated deal, and I'm certainly supportive of helping the university in so many ways, and a new athletic facility. $2 million for the university, I mean, may not seem like what you got. $30 million at EERC and other Merrifield and on and on. But for taxpayers of the city, this is money in trust for economic development. So, Mr. Pieper.
Yeah, I was just going to mention the structuring it this way is really started by leveraging the $2.5 million of private gifts in a timely manner so that we could meet the donors' wishes. And in order to do that, we have to work this through the foundation in the interim while we work with the state for long-term approvals. The reason why the foundation wouldn't be interested in holding it long-term is really just not wanting to have that risk and operating liability. And so we just try to get it back under our management, control, and ownership as soon as legally allowable. And so the foundation is kind of just doing us a favor in the interim, again, to leverage the $2.5 million private gifts that
Mr. White.
Just a couple of questions, and correct me if I'm wrong. So $2.5 million gift from a private donor. That's correct, right? Collecting the pilot, we're collecting no property taxes later. How many softball fields do we have at Grand Forks? I think it's probably 4. None of them which can host really any type of tournaments. No turf fields. In a week through the winter, how many times do you think Fritz Pollard is used by an outside source that isn't UND related? Good. Yes.
I mean, I just heard like it was fully utilized this spring until midnight.
So we have many of these facilities that without the university, we can't use. We've got a ton of kids that play soccer that use the Fritz Pollard all throughout the year. They use the turf at Old Memorial Stadium throughout the year. We have UND only has the only competition pool right now that anybody in the community can use. So we're talking about a $2 million loan that's, from my understanding, I don't believe Mr. Birian or anybody else has defaulted on any of their loans that I can recall. And so we're getting, 3% back over the first 10 years? And is it 4%? Or 2 and 3? 2 and 4? So the city's making money on this loan. And it's going to be a community asset. I don't see the negative in this. I think it's a great project. I think Mr. Phelan always says, how do we get to yes? And I think we found a way to get to yes and move this project forward. It's investment in the north end of Grand Forks. I've been hearing a lot lately that all we see for investment is in the south end of Grand Forks. Well, for probably the last 6 years that I've been on council, we've had significant investment in downtown. Every year, I feel like we're reconstructing another road in the heart of downtown Grand Forks. It's great to see some investment on the north end, so I appreciate Mr. Birian and the university for trying to come through with something and showing some investment on 2nd Avenue and North Columbia there. I'll move forward.
We have a motion and a second. First of all, 2% in relation to inflation does not make us money. But I appreciate the other things that you're saying there. And the interest in support for the near north side or for the north side neighborhood, have we consulted with the University Park Neighborhood Association? Because this will inevitably, no matter how much parking we build, there will be an impact in those neighborhoods. Yes, Mrs. Huston.
I have communicated with some of the people within the university corridor, north end neighborhood. They do have concerns about parking. They're losing a lot of parking and they're nervous that those sororities are going to start moving their vehicles then and parking in front of their private homes. So there has been concern stated about parking.
Council Member Weber, I think there is a planned public meeting for that neighborhood to discuss the concerns as it goes through the final planning and zoning series. That's coming up here in the next month.
Mrs. Huston.
Can you talk about maybe how much money we plan on spending with the infrastructure that this project is going to need?
Yes. Councilmember Salsky, You're going to get a briefing on that next Monday, but the first major thing we're going to have to move forward with is a sanitary sewer in this area, and that's going to be around $900,000. We're going to invest, and that will serve this entire area. The water, we have a water main along 2nd Avenue that will service not only this project, but all the projects around there, so that'll be good. The next major project will also have to work with UND on a stormwater detention pond or retention
Do you have
pond.
like any cost? You know, you keep talking about our steps that we're
I would say
taking.
$900,000 for
Okay.
the sanitary sewer main.
Yep.
I actually, sorry, he sent me an email the other day. So if you give me a second, I can pull it up here.
I just really think that this is a lot of money, and I do wish that the university would pony up some of their money, or even if the park district or the school district thinks this is such a great idea, I wish that they would get some money towards it.
Mr. Field.
I think we as a representative of the city of Grand Forks, we share, we're involved in a lot of things, but at the end of the day, if we don't lead, a lot of these things aren't going to get done. That's, we just don't have the horsepower to move these things forward. So right now, our estimate, and you'll see this next week, Monday, I would say the local sanitary sewer, it is a replacement for an aged system there that's really underserving the area. I would say if you put a number on that, it's probably going to be in and around $800,000 to $900,000. The water main, we will not have to improve. There'll be a stormwater pond that will have to be in this particular area that will have associated piping. That looks to be an estimate of $1.6 million, and that will serve this entire area, the Pollard Center, Memorial Village 1 and 2, because there's some stormwater issues, and then also the EERC. The city's cost share, we're looking at 1.6 right now, is likely in the 10 to 15% of that number. So that's would be our cost share on that particular. So that'll be an investment UND will make on behalf of all these broader developments in the area. On the transportation side, I talked about 2nd Avenue North. That our estimate right now is a little over $1 million on that. And the city carries an 80% cost share on that because it's a reconstruction of that street. And then the project on University Avenue would be $2.3 million, and again, the city carries 80% of that cost share. So those are all those projects, and we talk a lot about infill, and it's better than going on the greenfield. If you look at some of our greenfield developments, Grand Valley and all those, a pump station itself is probably $3 to $4 million just to put a pump station in a forest main. So we have all that infrastructure in there. We're renewing these streets around there. I would say this is a more expensive than a downtown project because this area was never really served with development. It was always a parking lot. And so when you have a parking lot, UND over the last 100 years, they've been kind of ad-libbing things over there, serving the Memorial Stadium and all those sorts of things. This is more expensive because now we're finally in this area going to serve real development, similar to a downtown area. Whereas in a downtown area, we have all this infrastructure because generally we're just replacing buildings that have been served with all these underground utilities. That's why this is a little more expensive.
Mr. White.
Mr. Phelan, when was the last time 2nd Avenue North was replaced? It's got to be at least 30 years, right?
I would say it's well beyond that.
Because I'm 33 and I grew up on 2nd Avenue North 20th, and I remember the same road as when I grew up and rode bike in the area. And we've already started reconstructing 2nd Avenue North between, I believe, Washington and 16th or 17th or 18th, somewhere in there. So we've already started the process because it needs to be done. Same with University Avenue. That mill and overlay was done, is that 15, 20 years ago from 25th to Columbia?
Yeah. We did an what was it called out? A thin lift overlay. Why were we doing that? We were just trying to get 5 years out of it. I think we're approaching 5 years because we knew we needed to reconstruct it. But we didn't know at the time because UND had development plans for this parking lot, and we wanted to wait to see what that looked like. So that's bought us some time, and it's
so prior to the thin overlay that we did, it's probably been 20 years, I'm guessing, because I remember that as a kid as well, somewhere.
So these are all probably likely 50-year process.
Things that we're going to be doing already that we need to get done. Sure, there's some water improvements that we're going to have to get done, but it's one of those things. We continue to make investments. I believe Alter Hospital, we made significant investment in some of the water stuff that was going on there as they were building their new hospital. So this isn't unlike us to do this for some of the new development that comes into town.
You are correct, Councilman. And if you look at Alter as an example, we helped with the stormwater system up front. That was about a $2 million investment that we made. And probably the final investment will be to reconstruct 30th behind the hospital. So when the hospital is complete, the old hospital is demoed, that reconstruction will occur behind the hospital. That will be another, likely a $3 to $5 million investment in that hospital.
Much of the road reconstruction downtown had a federal 90% cost share, so we benefited from that. But I said a little bit ago, infrastructure is a very legitimate role for the city in this, and overall I'm supportive of this project. And the pilot similarly is a sound economic development strategy. This loan is what I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around, and it's a very complicated. I've had it explained to me several times now. And I still am not sure that I could describe it to someone who will be owning it at different times and why the loan and why the city has this additional role. Infrastructure, yes. Pilot, yes. This additional role of the loan on top of that is still, I'm having a hard time to understand how that fits with our current economic development priorities, which are job creation. I am supportive of a shift towards quality of life and workforce recruitment. But even then, if I had $2 million for economic development in terms of quality of life and workforce recruitment, this would not be my first choice. Mr. Buren.
If I could say on behalf of why we think. Number one, I think it levers the $2.5 million investment. And without the cities, we're the lender of last resort in this case. The fear would be this: you would lose the 2.5, you wouldn't get the complex that would serve the general community. We know quality of life is incredibly important. If we're not there now, we know that's where we're going to go with a lot of our economic investments, the quality of life that really serve the community and our quality of life and for workforce, attraction and retention. So I think this fits within that. But again, it's your choice. In regards to that, I think you do have $2 million in the growth fund to distribute this, and thankfully this is a loan that will get repaid over time, and it gets the project across the finish line. My fear would be the project wouldn't move forward, and we'd have that vacant space there where wood could have been. But I'd ask Mr. Buren on why he can't just do it himself.
If I may, just a moment. There have been a couple of mics on. Mr. Vian and then Mayor Buczynski. Mr. Vian and then Mayor Buczynski, please.
Well, I think, this isn't perfect. If it was perfect, we wouldn't have to make a loan for it. But I think we've got great momentum going. This is another facility that our community can use, including youth. We continue to talk about that. A lot of this infrastructure is a challenge, but a lot of this is end of life cycle to begin with, so it needs to be done. This gives us a reason to do it and to add a nice feature there. The loan is certainly creative. I think it's unique. But I think we've done some unique things to try to keep the momentum going. I've got no doubt that it's going to be repaid. I mean, you can imagine the headline if the state doesn't pay back the city for, ultimately it's very unique on that front. But I have no doubt that we'll get paid back on it. But is there a better use for that money? In the meantime, we've got significant balances sitting in the growth fund, both 5996 and 2163. I think at some point you've got to put that money to work, and a project like this, it makes sense. I think the developers haven't put their name on it as a guarantee when they only own it for a short period of time. They build, they hand it off. They got a guarantee essentially that someone else's, the payments are getting made. I think they're taking a big risk, and if Grand Forks wasn't moving, I don't think they're here and taking those risks. The community wasn't behind it, so I'm supportive of it, even though it's not perfect. Let's put it that way.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Vian.
Well, I think I like what you said about all the things with the infrastructure and the city's responsibilities. That makes absolute sense. So for me, I'm similar to you. I look at the $2 million that we're trying to do. What pushes me over in favor of it is it's a public-private partnership. That's how we're going to get it done. Private sector can't do it on its own. It needs the help. And we're doing a loan, not a grant, that's going to offset and leverage $2.5 million donation. And so in the end, being able to do that tells me it's a good investment, even though 2% return on investment doesn't quite do it.
Thank you, Mr. Beer, please.
President JDA, President Weber, members of the JDA or Growth Fund. If you look at it, I guess one thing that maybe nuanced that even makes this even more complicated, and Todd alluded to it earlier, but when we originally submitted the application, we submitted for a pilot / TIF. And so what we were hoping for is to get, some property tax abatement, which you've done up to 95%, leaving us with 5% plus the land tax. But the other approach we were doing was to access what we could afford from additional property tax funds. The TIF was going to be this $2 million repayment. And as Todd said, the conventional approach then would go sell a bond and go through the whole formal TIF process. And because of interest rates, the size of the bond, just a variety of things, to Mr. Weigel's point about Todd wanting to get to yes, he and Maureen came up with the idea that why don't we use some of these resources that we have available and do like a quasi-TIF where we're just using city loan dollars instead of the bond to achieve the same thing. The repayment for the 117 and 145, which I got a little different math, so we'll have to work through. It doesn't benefit either of us, but we'll have to work through that. Will come from our property tax bucket. I think Todd mentioned way at the beginning that it's about the effect of 22%. And so even though some may perceive us getting a pilot for 95%, if you add the 5 plus the 22, will it be in effect paying 27% of our property taxes back throughout the whole 20-year period? 5 will go to the conventional approach, and 22 will go back to pay the loan. And so maybe a clarification, Mayor Buczynski, on your comment, we don't lose the loan payments when it gets transferred. We're still on the hook to make those, and we're going to use our property tax bucket to achieve that. So our effective pilot TIF is really only, if I'm doing the math right, 73%, right? And so we haven't had, aggressive deals like this have been getting much, much better deals than 73%. But we feel that we can make that work in our pro forma, 5% the classic way, 22% through paying back the loan. And the loan was Mr. Phelan and Maureen's creative way to avoid the bond market and still get this to yes.
Yeah, Mr. Berry, I guess my point was that you're making payments on something that you don't own.
For sure. Yeah. That makes sense. I know it's more nuanced, even more nuanced than we've been talking about, but I think that was, we applied for it in a more classic way, and your city staff came up with a better solution, I think, that allowed us to, because otherwise we would have been paying a lot more interest, we'd have been paying coverage covenant, we would have been paying, having a debt service reserve, and by using your banking approach, we're able to take that $2 million and put it all to work and make it leverage that 2.5 and get the job done. And we don't, unlike Bernie's epic deal, the square was part and parcel to his strategy. Todd, I guess what I call it bolt on, I think you said the other day. Softball just kind of got bolted on to make it more easy to get done in a timely fashion. But we're willing to do that, seeing the benefit that it provides to the UND and the community and the region.
I have one last question. It would be for Mr. Johnson and for Mr. Peter, if I may. This seems to be an important matter for President Armacost and for Ms. Carlson's Inc. They're not here. You're here to speak on their behalf. Can you help me to understand why this is important to UND and to the foundation?
So I would go back, our master planning specific to athletics. Softball field is high on our priorities, but it was behind completing the Pollard Center. And so 100% of the focus has really been getting that across the line this summer so construction can start. We were approached, by a gift to say, can you do this for the softball field? So it matches what our long-term intent was. I think for UND and for the greater Grand Forks community, there's no turf softball field for girls softball in the greater Grand Forks. So there's Title IX issues for K-12. There's, not as much Title IX issues for UND in that regards because we don't have a comparable sport at that time. But I think it's the right thing to do for UND athletics and for youth sports and K-12 sports. The benefit, we played most of our softball games at North Dakota State University Stadium in spring. The Grand Forks high schools will probably never host a EDC tournament because they don't have a facility. I think the community could put a bid in for even hosting a state tournament. So I just think it's the right thing for UND. It's the right thing for the community. It just came at a time when we were pushing Merrifield and Palm over the finish line. The foundation is actually still cash flowing Pollard 1 as we push Pollard 2 over the line. And, we received $57.4 million, plus the legislature said they would like to see us receive another $52 million for STEM-related projects on campus with a 30% local fundraising match. So these things are just stacking up, and we were looking for a creative approach to get it done. I think the university's intent has been to give a lot more than upperclassmen housing. We know there's about 1,000 students that want to live on or near the campus. They don't have the amenities and the things that they're looking for. We would rather see the public sector do that. And when the public sector does that in MV1 and MV2, it generates tax revenue. I think I heard when both MV1 and MV2 were fully taxable, generate around $990,000 in taxes. So for us, it was, can we tap that in the short term to push this project over the finish line to benefit UND and to benefit the community, but leveraging that tax revenue that would never be there if UND did. And we have 4 or 5 other high-profile sites that we want to get developed, hopefully by the private development, and put more property back on the tax rolls.
Mike, you have our trust and admiration. The work that you've been doing on campus is tremendously impressive. The campus is absolutely beautiful, and it's continuing to be that way. The redesign, all of that work, it's impressive. I'm just asking, is this, he's not here, but so on his behalf, is this a priority for President Armacost?
I don't really want to speak for the president. I just say that it was a priority in the master plan that was presented to leadership and presented to the state and was accepted by the state. But it was a priority behind the Pollard addition. And so the $2.5 million donor that came forward, we'd like to see that money get invested in Grand Forks, and we felt this was the best way to go about it.
And Mr. Johnson, I guess you'd have to give me a similar response if I were to ask about Ms. Carlson-Zink's case. Any further comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Motion passes. Item 2.3, Ms. Richards, extend JLG contract for renovation of the Hive second floor.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. As you may recall, JLG was the architect of record for the EDA funded renovation of the majority of this building. When the lease with the Herald was terminated last month, that makes now 5,000 square feet of space on the second floor available. That space does need significant renovation, and so the request is to authorize extending the contract to JLG to the fit up of that space. Preliminary conversations with Sean Senescal from JLG have generated cost estimates of about $115 to $120 a square foot to do that kind of what we're calling a white box basic renovation, including the A&E fees on top of that at 8%. We're looking at a total project cost of about $650,000. We're hoping that that space will be then in turn rented for $20 a square foot. And while we don't have any firm commitments from any tenants at this point, we do have a lot of interest. And so assuming you do approve going ahead with this request, JLG will be starting their design concurrent with staff working on kind of nailing down those tenant commitments. And then, of course, before we would proceed, once JLG has finished their design and developed detailed cost estimates, we'd be back to this group for authorization to proceed. So again, the request is to extend the contract with JLG. This was heard at Growth Fund Committee on June 26th, and they recommended approval unanimously. Sean is here if you have any questions, and I can certainly answer any myself if I can.
Thank you, Ms. Richards. I'll open the public hearing. Does anyone wish to speak to this matter? Close the public hearing.
Move approval.
We have a motion approval.
Second.
Sandy, and second from Representative Kvamme. Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you. Motion to adjourn from Mr. Weigel, second from Mrs. Susky. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. We will call to order the Grand Forks City Council meeting for Wednesday, July 5th, 2023. Roll call, please.
Weigel.
Here.
Kelsey.
Here.
Weber.
Here.
Lunsky.
Here.
Kvamme. Sandy.
Here.
Here.
All present, we have quorum.
Thank you. Item 1.2, Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Couple of announcements today. Item 1.3, Mayor's announcements. I got a chance to meet last week. I guess it was last week on Tuesday, June 20th. With Colonel Curry and Colonel Monroe, so I'd have to sit down at dinner with the incoming and the outgoing wing commanders out at the base. Definitely a good meeting, very good questions asked by Colonel Monroe, and both got to learn and listen quite a bit, so that was great. And then on Wednesday, turned around and went out to Washington, D.C. for some ADC meetings that really revolved around CFIUS. So I want to thank Councilmember Osowski, who made the trip and took quite a bit of time out of her week to be out there, so thank you for that. And then obviously Friday 23rd, then we had followed up with the change of command. So I want to just take a chance here on behalf of the city and the city council to welcome Tim and Jenny Monroe to the Grand Forks community, with Tim Monroe being the new Grand Forks wing commander. So we sent the Tim and Jenny on their way, and we brought another Tim and Jenny back in. So we feel quite at home on a first name basis. So with that, that's all I got for mayor's announcements. We'll move on to awards, presentations, appointments, and proclamations. I think if we can start with Mr. Weber. I know you're the chair of the legislative committee for the city. So if you want to start, then I know John Bernstrom's ready to take over and give us a cheery review.
Yes, it was it always is a long session. I don't know that people fully understand, but the amount of time primarily from department heads and from Mr. Bernstrom and Mr. Phelan that goes into the session. We had a lot of miles tracked back and forth between Bismarck and many more hours spent on giving online testimony. Overall, a successful session in relation to appropriations. And with that, my thanks to you again, Mr. Burnstrom, not just for your work all through the session, but for the excellent final report as well. Take it away.
Thank you, Councilmember Weber, Mayor Wojcicki, members of council. So the report that is posted online with the agenda, if you get to page 3, you'll see our legislative priorities and their position statements, and then the bills directly impacting those priorities. That's what I'm going to speak on here tonight. Our first priority, we're under infrastructure. We talked about the Prairie Dog funding, which is, buckets need to fill with state funds in a certain order, and then eventually there's a city and county bucket that we're able to get allocations for. We just asked if our bucket could be moved a little bit sooner in line. We were not successful in that, and in fact, when it came to the Prairie Dog, various buckets were added for different programs and increases due to inflation. There's now an extra $175 million of revenue that will need to be generated before that city bucket starts being filled. So just to note on that. When it comes to North Dakota Infrastructure Revolving Loan Fund, Senate Bill 2330 allocated $150 million to the Legacy Infrastructure Revolving Loan Fund. Of that $150 million, $60 million is going to be dedicated to local cost share for Red River Valley Water Supply Project. So that is good. We will get more on the Red River Valley Water Supply Project later on here. When we got into our specific infrastructure projects, grade separation of 42nd and Demers, obviously earlier in June, we got the $30 million allocation for the Railroad Crossing Safety Federal Grant. Also had an additional $7.5 million in federal highway funds that came with that. North Dakota DOT has already committed $4.5 million prior to this session to that project. So we will be working, by we, I mean the city of Grand Forks, through various DOT funds, programs to get that project across the finish line. Of note in here, you guys as a city council will see choose a design concept coming up here in August for that project. Other project is the interchange of 47th Avenue South. Again, various DOT programs. One specifically that was created, I'll get to that in one second. There is a highway legacy earnings highway distribution fund that was created, and this will be funded with $100 million of legacy fund earnings. $10.3 million of that is dedicated to cities. Our Grand Forks is expected to receive just under $900,000 from that newly created fund. And speaking of newly created funds, North Dakota DOT has created a flexible transportation fund. It's funded up to $220 million. $51 million of that is a direct allocation done by the legislature, and then they're going to fund the rest of it by shifting 50% of the motor vehicle excise tax to that fund to an estimated amount of $171 million per biennium. This fund is created because North Dakota DOT recognized that they can work on state roads and federal government can work on federal projects. There was a gap in there. They talked about it, the last mile, first mile. We can build the interstate, but you need the interchange or whatever. You need to build that last mile to connect to the city infrastructure that's already there. So they want to use this fund. It's a brand new fund, so we're still learning about it as well at the city level, but it is funded to $200+ million. Water projects. Senate Bill 2020 allocated $100 million this biennium to the Red River Valley Water Supply. There's also legislative intent in that bill that is going to, with the intent to fund up to $953 million for the entire project at a 75-25 cost share. That's the legislative intent. Of course, that can change, but that was worded in the bill. This biennium has $180 million in it. Also within, expect to see, saying this right here, Todd, interim Series D agreements coming up here later this month for that local share this next biennium. They also put in $150 million. I mentioned that infrastructure revolving loan fund. $60 million of that 150 is dedicated to local cost share for Red River Valley Water Supply. Also in Senate Bill 2020, they have $89.2 million for municipal water supply grants. and there's going to be a 60% cost share on that. And then they also allocated $100 million for the Water Infrastructure Revolving Loan Fund. All positives here for the city that we can tap into. When it comes to public safety, under their they funded Siren for the next biennium. That is the State Interoperable Radio Network. And then also from the public health side, I got this information from Mr. Dulitz at Grand Forks Public Health. They are funding one certified community behavioral health clinic. He considers that a win because that is going to create the path of how to have others. But they did fund one. And then from a fire standpoint, we've been working, where's Chief Lawrence back there? We've been working many sessions for local fire departments to get access to the insurance money that is supposed to go to local fire departments, but it gets hung up at the state. We have to ask for it every session. That has now changed. They have moved the state fire marshal under the insurance commissioner's office, and the insurance commissioner then will have the ability to allocate those funds without it having to be asked for every session.
A permanent change.
A permanent change. So that's a good one there. I was up here several times during the session talking about NDPERS and the defined benefit plan. House Bill 1040 did terminate that plan. The House Bill 1040 terminated for any hire January 1 of 2025. Last couple of days of the session, there was an amendment made to the Office of Management and Budget bill that changed that termination date to January 1, 2024. There is an asterisk to that. The PERS commission, we use the term PERS committee. They have to, if they say they can't do it that quickly, then it'll revert back to 2025. But they are currently working to see if they can get that done by 2024. So just be aware of that. I should mention where I talk about Prairie Dog, part of that PERS funding is the way they're going to fund the unfunded mandate within the defined benefit plan, is they have added a $65 million bucket within Prairie Dog to fund that moving forward. And then, and I should mention the employer contribution will increase within the defined contribution in the main plan by 1% and in the public safety plan by 1.59%. So just be aware of that. They expanded the homestead tax credit. That's a good thing. In fact, I heard from Tammy, you mentioned it earlier, lots of phone calls for the homestead tax credit. They have expanded that program as we talked about tax increment financing and various things, tax breaks and stuff. One of our priorities under community and economic development. That's a good expansion. The Career Impact Academy, the CIA. So if you remember, they raised local funds to match a federal grant they were approved of, but the money wasn't being released from the federal government for whatever reason, and inflation was kicking in pretty hard. So the state came in under House Bill 1119 and funded matched that federal fund. So when the federal funds came, the state would then just take the federal funds to get these projects moving. So for the 13 CTE centers around the state funded those. Then also within the Department of Commerce budget, tried to address inflation. They put in an additional $26 million towards these centers. I reached out to Mr. Rickley, and he said Grand Forks' share of that is about $3 million, which they expect to see here pretty soon. Several workforce funds were filled. They put $62.6 million to a child care assistance program. That was one of our priorities. And then should also mention, as we're talking about, we specifically mentioned the Children's Museum within our priorities, quality of life. Department of Commerce budget provides $25 million for tourism destination development grants, and each individual applicants can max out at $5 million. So opportunities there. And again, within this report, you'll see all the bills we were tracking, what we provided testimony for, what passed, what didn't pass. Should note just a couple of them. The emergency snow removal. If you remember that was an emergency clause early on. That passed, and of course I don't have it in front of me. And we've received, Maureen, we have received our first half funding. little over 200,000. With the way they ordered the bill was there's going to be a first half and a second. So waiting on the second half on that one. So thank you, Maureen. And with that, I will be open to any questions.
Thank you, John. A lot of complex technical information. If you've not yet had a chance to look at the report, it's presented in a very clear and concise manner for the amount of information you provided. Also, let me note that there's understandably a lot of attention, a lot of focus on the legislature during the session, but some of the most important work occurs during the interim. And so the city's legislative committee and department heads will continue to monitor hearings and other actions of the interim session, where often much of the budget precedents, budget drafts, legislative drafts are originally put together. Let me also take a quick second to congratulate Matt Gardner. It was his first session as the new executive director of the League of Cities. Ably led, did a great job, he and his team. And also congratulations to the North Dakota League of Cities new president, chosen by cities across the state as a representation of their respect that this individual enjoys, our very own Mr. Phelan. So President Phelan now at League of Cities meetings. That's all I've got, unless there are any questions for Mr. Burns.
I just got one comment I'll make. I've been pounding the table on this one, working with assessing, but I think I'll just mention it one more time in case we've got any listeners that aren't taking advantage. But the new homestead tax credit, if you're 65 years or older, or you're permanently disabled, and you make $40,000 or less after medical expenses, you can get a $200,000 reduction on your home. That means if your home's $200,000 or less, you would pay nothing in property tax. If it's $400,000, it drops it down to $200,000, saves you about $3,000. If your income's between $40,000 and $70,000, you get a $100,000 drop in your house, which will save you about $1,500, and that's after medical expenses. So check with your finances. And maybe you make $80,000, but you have $15,000 in expenses. That would get you $100,000 off. I think that's really important. Seeing the recent referendums that we've had at the schools, taxes are going up because mills are going up at some of the other entities. So this is an opportunity. The city still gets that money. It's just a reimbursement from the state. So all the local, you're not shorting any of the local subdivisions. They're still going to get the money. It just comes from the state rather than from your pocket. So all the council members, anyone, if you see somebody, let them know that, because that can make a big difference.
And good point. You do have to apply for that.
And that's something, and assessing it, they'll help you fill out the paperwork. Just give them a call. I know they've been overloaded a little bit recently on that, but once you apply for it once, they're going to send it back to you each year, so you won't have to constantly apply or sign something and send it back.
Mr. Phelan, Mr. Bean, sorry.
I just wanted to say, over the years, Mr. Weber, you and I co-chaired this. This last year, you did it all by yourself. It's a lot of work, having been around it for each year to manage this. So thank you for the work that you did, John, for helping administer. But Todd and Maureen and others, it's a huge effort that goes into this. It's all done behind the scenes, and all the department heads working with our legislators. I mean, I think it's been an amazing team to have the results that have been identified today. There certainly are shortcomings. We all wanted to get them, but you look at the effectiveness of our team, and it's probably second to none in the state. So I think we just want to say thanks for the work you guys do.
Thank you.
All right. On 3, public hearing and second reading of ordinances.
3.1, public hearing on application for tax incentives for expended business property.
Thank you. Looks like we got A through K, a lot of different attachments here, but Mr. Phelan, please take it away.
Will do. And Mayor Paczynski, I also want to recognize that Dennis Egan is here virtually online on behalf of Epitome Energy. Again, this is an 83% 15-year exemption request. It generally matches what there's 2 soybean crushing facilities that are going up right now. One at Spiritwood, outside of Jamestown. The other one is outside of Castleton. And so specifically, when we looked at this, the Castleton facility is the most closely aligned with what we're looking at here. And so they've received this 83% 15 years. And so that's what we move forward with as part of a preliminary recommendation. I want to say that I was at the park board. They're part of the city's approval, but I did brief them on June 6th. The Manville Public School Board approved the 83 and 15 on June 12th, and then the County Commission approved it on June 20th. So it was actually a little fun going. Well, it was a lot of fun going to Manville. They were really appreciative. So if you look at the charts here, they're going to benefit a lot, and they really appreciated what the city is doing, and that's why I think it was kind of refreshing going to a governing board that was appreciative and positive, and seeing some of the benefits that might bring them in their future, whether it's renovations and what have you. I just want to point out in year one, because it is at 83%, we've estimated the land value. And again, the project has to get completed. Dan always says this, our city attorney, Dan Goss, always says, these are all estimates until everything is done, but the land value is estimated currently at $4 million. The improvement value we're estimating will be at $175 million. So that's what we're estimating right now. The current land value is $60,000. So obviously, it's a big deal turning agricultural land into industrial development. Year one, the land value is estimated to bring in $62,800. That improvement value of $175 million, 17% of that will bring in $467,857 for a year one taxable value of $530,657. Again, that's all additional revenue that we don't have currently. And then in year 16 is really the big win, where that $530,000 will turn into just over $3.2 million is our estimate when it's fully taxable. So it's a big deal. Lots of appreciation, and I just wanted to highlight Manville Public School. We did also brief the North Dakota Department of Commerce for what we're supposed to do as part of the statute during this June 5th to July 5th. And again, this will be all integrated into the development agreement, and similar to we went through Memorial Village 2, this will also require lots of infrastructure upgrades from roads to water to sewer to storm, and that will also be incorporated as part of the development agreement along with all the regulatory things. So this is usually the first thing that comes through. I suspect planning and zoning will be the next regulatory piece as we work through the various infrastructure components. With that, I'd ask Mr. Gossett just to kind of finish off with some of the agreements that are in front of you.
Thank you. Mayor and City Council members, what you're really doing tonight is approving the resolution that was part of the board packet. And what the resolution does is first, sections 1.1 and 1.2 of the resolution just describes the property where the development is at and what the development would be. Section 1.3, I want to point this out. There's going to be, part of the package is also a development agreement, which has much more detail as far as the development of this project, the infrastructure, and what have you, and all the construction standards that would be required under the development agreement. Section 1.3 then describes that, I described it as the primary development agreement as opposed to the pilot development agreement that will be entered into. 1.4 just provides that the developer should cause that this Grand Forks plant and its development will be consistent with the 2050 land use plan. I believe there might even have to be an amendment to the 2050 land use plan for this particular project. 1.5 and 1.7 of the resolution just describes various benefits from this project, economic benefits. Those are derived from prior staff reports that on this particular project. And those are important because at the end of the day, in order for this pilot to go forward, the city council needs to find that this is in the best interest of the city. And we'll get into that in a bit. 1.6, the pilot became necessary to retain this development. That was one of the discussion points with respect to the developer and getting this development to retain development in Grand Forks. 1.8 through 1.11, Mr. Vela just went through that, all the various procedures that the city went through, namely contacting the county because it's more than 5 years, the county and the school district, the Department of Commerce. We also have to publish notice because there's potential competitors. And so their competitor could come in and make comment. We've done that. We use the LEGAC because part of the process is you have to have a representative of the school district to be a participant in the process. So LEGAC serves that purpose. 1.12 and 1.13 of the resolution then describes that this is in the best interest of, based upon the foregoing, the pilot is in the best interest of the city. A couple of things I want to point out is section 2 is you're approving the pilot agreement, pilot development agreement, which is attached. It's on the condition, however, that that primary development agreement is also approved and executed by the city. We haven't gotten to that point yet. And so the pilot and your approval of the pilot agreement tonight is conditioned upon a subsequent, that primary development agreement being executed. We haven't gotten to that spot quite yet. I do have the developer does have the agreement and waiting for comments back from them. And I'm sure you'll see that in the near future. Also, it's subject to approval and meeting all the conditions for the pilot. And then section 3, again, you're approving the pilot or the tax exemption or the tax payment in lieu of taxes under the agreement. Again, conditioned on this primary development agreement being approved and executed both by the city and the developer and the various conditions. I'm going to go through just real briefly some of the items again, and it's important to understand that the pilot only becomes effective once the project is completed. So during the construction period, property continues to be subject to property taxation. It's by statute, the pilot can't be effective until the project is completed. And that's one of the conditions for the pilot under the agreement itself, that we have, it is finally completed and a certificate of occupancy is issued. The agreement, I like to put this in as it gives an example as to how to calculate the pilot, because it'll change on an annual basis. We're actually using actual numbers on an annual basis. Our city assessor will determine what's called the incremental value, or the value of the property each and every year, as if the pilot didn't exist, as if the agreement didn't exist. And we have what's called the original property value, which is zero today because there is no buildings out there. And again, the land continues to be subject to property tax. The pilot only relates to buildings and improvements that are made to the land. The dirt itself continues to be subject to property tax. And so each year, our city assessor will go through that analysis and then apply the mill rate for that particular year, each and every year, to what's called the pilot true and full value. So we're deducting 83% of the incremental value on an annual basis and applying the mill rate to that true and full value on an annual basis. So the amount of property tax should presumably go up on an annual basis. But I give an example in the agreements. If somebody's looking at it 10 years from now, they can see how the calculations is to be done. Again, there are a number of conditions that have to be satisfied, one of which is the development agreement is executed and approved. The project is substantially completed and the certificate of occupancy is issued. There's no default during the term of the pilot agreement or under the development agreement itself. And again, the representations and warranties are accurate throughout each assessment date. It's a 15-year term, except that it can be terminated earlier by statute. And we've cited to the statutes 4057.103 subsection 3 gives change of ownership can cause the pilot to be terminated. Also, if there's a discontinuation of business, that's an event that can terminate the pilot agreement, and if there's a default under the agreement. One of the representations that I just cited, it was talked about earlier, Senate Bill 2371 related to foreign entity-based companies. That's the new legislation that was passed, national security provision. There's also in this and in the next one you're talking about is more a village. There's a provision that the developer isn't a threat to, conflicts with, or is contrary to the operation and security of any federal governmental authority. So that's embedded within the agreement as well. There are default remedies under the pilot agreement, and they're connected with the development agreement itself, primary development agreement in this one. So if we have a default under the soon to be approved or sometime in the future a default under that primary development agreement, it's a default under the pilot agreement and vice versa. A couple other items that you'll see both in this one and Mora Village is special assessments are unaffected by this agreement. Also, there's no eligibility for any other property tax benefit going in the future. So that's a very brief summary of the pilot agreement. It's very similar to what we've seen historically for the city as well.
All right, thank you, Mr. Goss. Does that complete your presentation? I'm going to open up the public hearing first, and you guys can hang out if there's any further questions from council. Appreciate that. So, open the public hearing item 3.1. We're here to speak upon that item. All right, seeing that, we'll close the public hearing portion. Any questions for Mr. Gossett or Mr. Keel?
Mr. Gossett, you probably already addressed this, but there's a lot of information there. The working draft of the development agreement, when would we anticipate, if this moves forward tonight, when would we anticipate seeing a final development agreement that we would put on?
The draft that you made, that's part of the board packet, it has been with the developer for a bit, waiting for some red line, and I know their attorney is reviewing it, and he's promised to give me a red line version back so I can see what changes are being proposed. And once we get to a spot where the attorneys and maybe the administration are comfortable with presenting it to the council, then we would. I'm hoping within the next month.
Very good. And you've already indicated that there are a number of conditions that need to be met before the pilot would be in effect anyway. One of those would be mutual approval of the development agreement.
Correct.
Very good. I'll move approval.
Motion approved from Vice President Weber. Second from Mr. Weigel. Further questions? Comments? Mr. Bean, please.
Yeah, I'm not for sure who this would be for, but one of the development agreement is an example of something that I've requested we get some type of early. We have the whole thing, but kind of a condensed version that would describe the more specific details to it that would be, I guess, most relevant, that we would be able to look at that. The second thing would be, depending on the complexities of it, I'd love to see some type of work session to look for it. Some of my findings, I think, from the last time we went through it, I had a different expectation than what actually I learned at the end about being able to address other issues that may be there. And as you know, I've looked at some of my due diligence items that I would like to, obviously not here, but be able to have a chance to go through and review that's in there. Because there is I'd love to see what the total infrastructure is going to be, what the infrastructure costs are going to be, how we're going to address all of that. It's a really complex issue, although this one is far different than the last one. It's still got a lot of similarities to it. And I just want to make sure we have ample time to be able to understand that before we vote on the total package, is what I'm thinking. I know this is a step forward. Do we have an idea what the timeline or time frame is going forward to the whole thing? Obviously, we're going to need some response back from the developer and all of that. Do we have any idea when we might anticipate taking any final actions on this? Because we're going to have to do planning and zoning. I mean, we're going to go through this whole thing over again, right?
I think Councilmember Van and I had a conversation. I think we agreed on this, is that we're going to take our lessons learned and embed those into this Epitome Energy project. And one was to get information to you sooner rather than later and allow you guys to really engage before things are more fully baked. So we'll do that. The other thing is to come up with a summary document. So we're not giving you a 60-page document, really discern those things that you really want to care about. And then also have work sessions in which we can be around a table and really work through the details. This is always hard because we're coming back and forth, that we work on that. And so we're working on all those. I would say one of the main things we're working on right now with Mr. Egan is how we're going to serve it from a water perspective. And we talked about potable, fire, and gray water. And so we're working with, in this case, Agassiz Rural Water to come up with the chosen path forward with Dennis Egan in Epitome Energy, because that allows us to go to the state to ask for funding. So that's been one of the things we're working hard on. The other program that John talked about was the flexible transportation program. I think we're going to need to use that because we're probably 3-4 miles from where we have paved roadway, so we're going to have to use those funds along with other funds. So we're kind of nailing those down. But I would maybe ask maybe Dennis, maybe this is an opportunity for you, Dennis, to let us know how are things going on the investment front, and when do you think you'll want to start moving forward with the project as we work through the summer?
Thank you, Mayor, council members, staff. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you tonight. A couple of things. One is on the question on the developers agreement. I would like to be able to see us be able to button that down and get feedback back to staff sooner than later, and that we could resolve all of our issues by the end of August at the very latest. With the 4th of July, we had some people gone and out of town, and I believe they're all going to be back this week. So we'll be moving forward with our red lines, getting that back. So that first and foremost, I think we're really close on the water issue, which will be part of that developers agreement. I think we are in agreement to continue to move forward with the traffic study, and that'll be part of the developers agreement as well. So a bunch of pieces are being pulled together. Our air permit was submitted to the state of North Dakota 2 weeks ago now, roughly. And so we're waiting for feedback from the state and looking at what their timeline will be. But we are the third like project that they will have permitted within the last 2 years or less. Staff is very confident that given the same type of equipment, the same process, it's our understanding that they feel very confident to move that process quickly. And so as we continue to pull all these pieces together, we continue to meet with equity investors. We're very confident that we have probably 3 or 4 banks set to move forward on the debt side of things. I've been down in Texas recently meeting with potential equity investors. So a lot of moving pieces that are all falling in place. So I don't have specific timelines. Our timeline was always that we were going to try to move dirt fall of this year. But we need our air permit in place to actually put infrastructure in place. So that's looking more and more like, because of weather, that will be spring of next year before we can pour concrete and put infrastructure in place, just given the timing of the air permit. And then I think giving that opportunity to button down all of the logistics with the city, infrastructure, developers agreement, the township annexation piece, planning and zoning. We'll spend the rest of this summer and fall putting all those pieces in place. So hopefully that helps, but happy to answer any other specifics that you have.
Any other questions for Mr. Egan? All right, any further comments? All right, seeing none, we have a motion second on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously.
Again, Mayor, Council, we really do appreciate it. We're very excited to be in Grand Forks and to continue to move this project forward.
Thank you, Mr. Egan.
3.2, public hearing on application for tax abatement for numerous county costs for Memorial Village investments.
Mayor Pachansky, I'll just run through the financial numbers and ask Mr. Gossett to come up here one more time with me.
Could I, sorry, Todd Phelan or Mr. Phelan, could I please make the same motion that I made in JDA and ask to be recused?
Make that motion. That motion that we allow Mr. Kavami to partake and vote on the subject.
All right, thank you. We've got a motion and we have a second, again with the intention of voting it down. Seeing no further comment to that, all in favor signify by saying aye. Both same sign. Aye. You'll be recused from voting, Mr. Kavami. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor Pachansky and members of the City Council. Again, going over the Memorial Village too, we did just speak about this, but again, we have estimated the land value at $1.3 million regarding this specific development. Keep in mind, it's owned by UND. There's a zero on the land value right now. The improvement value, our city assessment team has put a value of $32.7 million. And if you look at the staff report, we're calling this about a $44 million development. So if you take the 1.3, that will bring $1 million for the estimated land value. Again, there's no exemption on the land. We've gone over that a few times. The value year one is $21,320. And that, since this is a 95% tax exemption over 20 years, that 5% on that $32.7 million improvement, that will bring in $26,814. So year one, our estimated taxable value is $48,134. And then in year 21, that $48,000 our estimate will be $680,000 and change the value. So right now it's zero. So we're adding a lot of value to this property and a lot of investment to it. So again, I went to the Park District. They're part of us, but I briefed them on June 6th. County Commission reviewed it on June 20th and approved it. Grand Forks Public School Board reviewed it on June 26th and approved it. And mentioned some of the quality of life things and positives. So along the way, there was lots of positives. We did follow up the North Dakota Department of Commerce over this last month. Again, we talked about the infrastructure plan will be coming forward to you here starting next week and over the next few years as this project gets developed. So with that, I'd hand it over to Mr. Costa to finish us up.
Just like the epitome, it really is approving the resolution tonight. Again, I'll just go through it real briefly. 1.1 and 1.2 just talks about the development and where the property is located. 1.4 through 1.8 to the resolution just goes through the various benefits from this particular project. As far as the university is concerned, the city, and all those are coming from former or previous staff reports. A little different than epitome is that this was reviewed by Baker Tilly, and that report is also part of your board packet. 1.10 through 1.13 just describes the various procedures that we had to go through for the pilot agreement, specifying those. 1.14 and 15 just describes that this development is in the best interest of the city, finding that needs to be made based upon foregoing facts of the resolution. Again, you're approving the pilot and the pilot agreement. And again, the pilot only becomes effective if they meet all the conditions. This one doesn't have a separate development agreement. The pilot agreement serves that purpose in this regard. And also, you do reserve the right to amend the development agreement or amend the pilot in the future per the resolution. I'll just go through a couple of things I wanted to point out. In my discussions with the developer's attorney, there's a couple of changes that they wanted to focus in on. One is, as I said before, the pilot doesn't become effective until the project is completed. Well, the softball field's probably going to get done a lot quicker than the building. And so that would mean the pilot would be effective for the softball field before the pilot becomes effective for the building. So they want to differentiate that starting date when the pilot become effective. I didn't see that as being necessarily, I thought that was a reasonable request for a couple of reasons. One, there's not a lot of value from the softball field as far as the building that the pilot would apply to. And second, with respect to the softball diamond, more than likely being transferred to the university anyways, and at that point it becomes tax exempt. So I didn't think that that was necessarily a huge ask or anything that we balk at. The second is, and you'll notice in section 2, it describes all kinds of construction standards that they have to comply with. One of the provisions talks about public infrastructure, and we had inserted that we'd apply the city cost share for each of the public infrastructure. The developer actually wants to go through what Mr. Phelan described, is to specify what the percentage is for each infrastructure. And I think that's reasonable to put in that type of detail, so everybody knows going in what the percentage of those infrastructure costs would be from the city standpoint and the developer standpoint. So that was a change that they requested as well. It's the same process as it is with the epitome. It's an annual determining what the incremental value is. It's a zero original value, and that incremental value will go up over time So if the value goes up a little bit, that 5% becomes a little bigger each year over the 20-year period of time of this pilot. Again, there are terminations provisions that are consistent with the statutes if they discontinue business or if there's a default. The conditions here before this pilot becomes effective is, I want to go through them again. It's the project has to be finally completed and a certificate of occupancy has to be issued. That's the certificate of occupancy only really apply to the building, not the softball diamond. That still has to be completed as well before the pilot becomes effective for that part. There has to be, property has to be replatted and rezoned. UND has to vacate North 25th Street and enter an agreement to maintain that vacated street. That's a condition before the pilot becomes effective. Also, the loan transaction, all the conditions for the loan, they have to be satisfied as well before the pilot becomes effective. And there's no default on each assessment date throughout the term of this agreement. So it's very similar to what you saw with Epitome. The other thing is that similar with Epitome is that if there's default under loan agreements, it can be deemed to be a default under pilot agreement 2 months after. So I'd be more than happy to answer your questions, but again, this is similar types of agreements you've seen before. A little nuances just because of the type of transaction you've got. It doesn't become effective for some time until it's completed.
All right, thank you. Open up for questions or comments.
I'll move approval of pilot and the pilot agreement.
Okay, we've got a motion to move approval. I'll look for a second. I'll go back to President Sandy. We've got a second. So motion from Vice President Weber, second from Yaslovsky. President Sandy, please.
So I'm trying to confirm exactly what we're doing here, Mr. Gosted, only because the JDA loan documents are also attached to this item. We aren't approving anything related to the loans here. We're only approving the pilot agreement, correct?
That's correct. The provisions of the loan have been approved by the JDA. They're embedded within the pilot agreement.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that wasn't part of the discussion. Thank you very much, Mr. Gosset.
All right, any other comments? All right, seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. We stuck with that on this one? I recall. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you. Well, before we'll have to strike that vote and we'll open the public hearing. Please, ma'am. Thank you for helping me out.
Not a problem. Mona Leak, 3231 Lord Circle. And I put this together rather quickly. But back on February 6th meeting, the application by Memorial Village Investment, LLC, a name was listed, Mike Kuntz. And I have some concerns about that. And I'd like to know if he is still part of this LLC.
Thank you. I think they did actually report on that back then, but please go ahead, Mr. Bryan. Could you step up there and answer?
Steve Bryan, Mayor Machinsky. Originally, Mike Kuntz was going to be a part of the ownership of this. He no longer will be a partner or a developer. We will likely retain his architectural firm to do the design work. That would just be a straight architectural relationship, no ownership or development involved.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Please, Ms. Lee.
Well, thank you. I don't know if I should go any further here, but because of his family, but I still have concerns because I don't know if you're aware that he's being investigated by the North Dakota Security Commission. And I think this is a concern to the public, and it should be a concern to the university and the city. There was a red flag because I remember reading something about it with his company. So I did some investigating. And I came across an article in the Forum on April 24th that was written by Patrick Springer. And it was quite lengthy, and I would suggest you read it. because it talked about his involvement down in Mesa, Arizona with the Bellbank Park 320-acre facility, which is an athletic facility. And I could go into all those details, but I'd rather you read it. I then called the North Dakota Security Commission, talked to Mr. Schmidt. He informed me that there is an ongoing commission. This was on May 1st when I talked to him the first time. Ongoing investigation with him with issues in North Dakota and also down in Mesa, Arizona. This is a large facility that he has his own company, another title. So then today I followed up to see where the investigation has gone, and it is still ongoing. And it is very, very layered. There has been money shuffled around, checks going to China, coming back. And I would suggest that you read that. And just as a citizen, I'm concerned because he's being investigated by the North Dakota Commission. And they say they will continue and it's going to be a thorough investigation. So that is my concern as a citizen, and I hope the university and also the council of the city is aware of that and takes that into consideration as far as our business practices, because there has been, unfortunately, some people have lost money, lots of money.
Mrs. Lee, could you send me a link to the article you're referring to?
Yeah, I gladly do that.
Thank you very much.
So, yeah, and I have it right here too. I'm sure we don't have a copy machine, but I think it's quite important that we follow through with this. And okay, I'm going to add this. I'm throwing this in. You know, this whole situation with this development is great, but I do not understand why the university isn't fronting the money for this. I pay taxes to the state. The university doesn't pay taxes, but that supports the university. I'm all for education, publication, especially. I am an advocate. So then I, as a resident and a homeowner, am paying taxes. So it's double dipping. You're taking taxes twice from me. The university has a foundation. They have an alumni association. There is tons of money there. The way I see it is they're using our money because they can get a better deal. They have their money invested. They can make more money where their money is invested and use us as their bank. Now, business practices, I don't think we should be used that way. I think the university should come up with their own money. And I'm all for projects in the community, but we have to start looking at the taxes. And I heard, and I don't know if this can be confirmed, we only, what is it, the percentage of homeowners in our community? Do you know that off the top of your head? How many, the percentage of our populations that own homes in this community?
Versus ones that are renting?
Yeah,
I think it's
exactly.
around 43% when I was campaigning. I didn't get that number.
And I heard recently it was only 35%, and I haven't had time to follow up on that. So when you take a look at the load you're putting on the community, and I think we need to encourage single family or home ownership. We have more apartments than China's got rice. That's an old saying, sorry. But I think we should take a look at that. And we want to keep people in the community. And I think the way we do that is home ownership. And I think we need to look at some projects that we can maybe invest in and give some tax breaks to some builders who can provide the type of home ownership that we need at the beginning. I'm just throwing out, I could keep talking, people, but I won't. But I'm just concerned about this as far as our business practices in the city.
All right, thank you, Ms. Leake.
All right.
Appreciate that. All right, anybody else here? My apologies. Anybody else here speak on item 3.2? All right, seeing none, I'm going to go back and ask for everyone to resubmit those motions.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, President Sandy, please.
What I'm actually a little bit confused right now. Mr. Bryan came up and said that it will be Mr. Kuntz's business doing some of the work. But I don't believe Icon is involved in Memorial Village 2, and I don't believe Mr. Kuntz is any longer an owner of Icon. So what exactly is Mr. Kuntz's involvement in this project?
You got Mr. Beard stepping up again.
Mayor Paczynski, City Council Member Sandy, it's my understanding that with Mike no longer working at Icon, he has a position with a firm called Rise Architectural, and they will be providing architectural services.
Sorry, wait a minute. You're telling me a company that Mike Kuntz is involved with is now doing the architectural work for Memorial 2?
Yes, I guess he's an extremely talented architect.
Yep, he certainly is. I'm sorry.
Any of the things that the previous gal spoke about are preventing him from continuing to do, what he's good at in terms of architectural services. And so he was the one that helped dream up some of the ideas for both Memorial Village 1, Memorial Village 2, and that we felt that sticking with him for Memorial Village 2 was in our best interest and the university's best interests.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan.
Mr. Weber, I had attempted to make quiet inquiries about Mr. Kuntz's involvement, and it was my understanding that he was not going to be involved in this way at all. So this is news to me.
Well, UND expressed some concern about ownership. We've heard other express concern about ownership. He won't be a part of any of the signed documents between ourselves and you, between ourselves and UND. He won't be, taking on any of the debt, doing any of those responsibilities. He'll simply be providing architectural services.
So we're still going to continue to employ some guy who ran a Ponzi scheme? That's what the headline says right here. So,
if I may, I am not Mike.
Although he's talented as an architect, I mean, it really doesn't make us look good that we're continuing to employ someone like that, or you are, I guess. So,
but I guess then it's really not a reflection on you, it's a reflection on me.
Can we get a new architect, or could you get a new architect? How much trouble would that be for you?
Well, I certainly could. I don't think it's in the project's best interest.
Thank you.
Mr. Field's got a comment.
Answer. I'm going to ask Mr. Goss to respond, but these are professional services. With the agreement say that, it has to be designed, built, constructed in an appropriate way. We're not specifying in any of these, nor would we, about who you should hire, why you should hire them, because then we have some responsibility. We just want qualified professionals that can design and construct that. That's what this pilot is. It's not about who they hire. And if they're legally able to do business, and it probably helps to some degree if somebody owes something to somebody. I suspect there are going to be a lot of agreements about whatever they make in the future needs to be paid back. So with that, I'd ask Mr. Gossett about what we can and cannot.
That's a good question. Can we specify the architecture? I mean, obviously that'd be a territory that would be tough for the city to be involved in if you've got granted, if we have projects we're doing, but this one's a private, guess, let us know what our leeway is in this one.
Yeah, you're asking a private enterprise to disengage and engage somebody different. Now, I do want to add that under the development agreement, in section 2.2.1D as in dog, it says all construction services, which is constructing, developing, designing, shall be performed in a competent and professional manner in good faith, pursuant to good industry practice, and that is usual and customary. And those terms are defined. And it says each contractor or subcontractor performing any construction services shall employ or contract suitable and necessary employees, professionals, contractors, and to the extent required, all such employees, professionals, contractors, and subcontractors shall have a valid license for the services or work to be performed. So we do have a little bit, but we're not directing who the architect is going to be. And I think you run into the risk of you start directing that, and there becomes an issue. Then we're involved in that selection process versus letting the private developer decide who they want to select for their professional services.
I guess I thought it was a partnership. So can we like ask them to remove or not use him anymore? Are we allowed to do that?
You can make your request. The issue you're going to be facing is that if they go down the path and they remove that person and they chose somebody else and there are issues with the second person, now what's our responsibility with respect to having removed somebody and having given that type of direction to the developer?
So does this man like own this architecture company? Does he work there?
I think the original concern that came up, and I think Council President Sandy brought it to me originally, is that is Mr. Coons involved in any of the ownership or partnership of the project? And the answer was no, other than providing professional services. So he's not an owner in any form or shape on this particular project. And I think what we want to tell the developer is that you need to hire qualified, licensed professionals, both to design and construct this facility. And I think they've heard what your concerns are this evening, but I think ultimately we want them to make their final choice with an open mind, with hearing what you've done tonight. But I would not recommend you go anywhere further.
Mr. Weber, my concern all along has been the loan rather than the pilot. I don't know that any of these issues, Mr. Gaustad, are different with the loan or the pilot. I'm guessing they would be the same. And in addition to that, I'm wondering why an RFP was never part of this process, or was it for the partnership?
I understand that the university put out an RFP for the development itself. As far as the loan is concerned, given that Mr. Coons is not an owner, he wouldn't be a guarantor. He's not going to be part of that lending transaction.
My understanding is there was an RFP.
Thanks.
UND's RFP, and so we're just trying to facilitate the development as the city agreement goes.
All right, thank you. All right, any further comment or motions from the council at this time? All right.
So we're waiting for a motion.
Yeah, well, or it'll die for lack of seconds.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, we have for lack of a motion, but we got a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, we got a motion and we got a second. Any further comments on the item? Yeah, please, Ms. Lonsky.
I think we are trusting Mr. Bjorn and his company. I think Mr. Coons has never been legally, he's never been charged with anything. Can we hold something against him if he hasn't been prosecuted? I think if we're going to kill a project because someone was charged for something and we have no outcome, I just think that's kind of depressing to let it die. Mr. Kuntz has no ownership. He is not on any legal documentation. I just would be really sad to see this project die.
Mr. Mayor, I would agree with Ms. Lunsky's assessment.
Well, thank you, Ms. Lunsky. President Sandy. Any further comments? All right, seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously.
Just as with epitome, thank you very much for the
Thank you, Mr. Berry. Much appreciated for your time as well. We'll move on to 4 citizen comments, and this will be citizen comments for action items. Do you have any in the item today? No. All right. Thank you. We'll move on to 5 action items. I know it looks like we're getting some good news on item 5.7, but I don't know if we want to pull that one for further discussion. Is there any items anyone wants to pull from action items for further discussion this evening? I guess I could just quickly say it looks promising that the state is going to follow up on concurring with that bid on item 5.7. So Washington now there's 30-second to Washington can get repaired. That's a big deal. I think that's a really important one. And I don't want to underscore, when we have these items sometimes, consent to move through doesn't mean that they're not important. I think the Vail Circle one on here is a tremendous project that has been many years in the making. You can finally get the state involved and FEMA involved to pay for that one. It's just a huge, huge relief. So unless there's any other, we're going to move through items. All right, item 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, 5.5, 5.6, 5.7, and 5.8. We're going to have a motion to approve these items. Got a motion approved from Ms. Osowski and a second from Mr. Weigel. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. There are no information items this evening, so we'll move on to 7, approval of minutes and bills.
1, vendor list and engineer's estimate.
All right, got a motion to approve? Yeah. Got a motion from Mr. Weigel, and we got a second from President Sandy. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously.
7.2, minutes for March 6th.
Are any adjustments to minutes or motions as is?
As is.
Got a motion from Mr. Weigel as is. Do we have a second? Second from Ms. Lunsky. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. All right, we're on to item number 8, citizen comments. Do you have any citizen comments this evening? We have none. So we'll move on to 9. Mr. Phelan, please. City Administrator comments.
Mayor Brzezinski. 2 major things coming at the next COW. We are going to have the Red River Valley Water Supply interim Series D agreements in front of you, and that's what John talked about, the funding that we received, 25% loan. And so Mr. Shockley will be here, who's Law's attorney, to go over those agreements with you and hopefully have some summary presentations about where the investment is going to go. So that'll be a sign of that project's moving forward and gets your briefings on that. And thanks to Ken Bean and all that he's doing as your city council representative. The other thing is we're going to be here to start discussing the FY24 mayor's budget, and we'll be talking about budget indicators and then also the salary plan. We'll be talking about both of those. So if you have any questions, there'll be more of a summary of kind of what we're looking at leading into the mayor's budget, and then the salary plan. We've got a lot of informational sessions, but if you have any questions for Kanji or I, please let us know, and then we'll be ready to brief that to at next week's COW. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Phelan. I'll move on to item 10, Mayor and Council Member comments. Mr. Weigel, any comments this evening?
No, thank you, Mayor.
All right, Ms. Osowski.
No, thank you.
Ms. Lunsky, any comments?
I just wanted to let everyone know, if you've been downtown, obviously you have because you're downtown right now. The DDA hired someone to clean streets every day, and if you see her, she's out there. She has a little push cleaner, but I think it's been a great improvement for downtown, and downtown's really sparkling. So
thanks. That's good to hear. I know they talked a lot about the business improvement district, so it must be some type of offshoot on that. So that's great to hear. Mr. Kavami, any comments?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, Mr. Bean. All right, Vice President Weber.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
President Sandy.
Thank you, Mayor. No.
All right, so I'll keep it short. Just hope everyone had a great 4th of July long weekend. Some of us obviously worked yesterday, but hope everyone spent some time with family. That's what's most important and what this is really all about in this life. So with that, I'd be looking for a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn.
Miss Osas usually beats it out of my mouth there. So we got a motion. Do we have a second? Be slower with the second on you there. We got a motion, a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned.